Thank you all very much for being here. I want to particularly thank the mayor. Of course, we had this scheduled for last night, but the storm had a little something to do with that. And while he's got another function to attend this evening, he was graciously able to come here and say a few words, and I certainly want to thank the mayor. I have kind of an affinity for mayors since I just served for the last 4 years as a mayor of Manchester. And I can tell you firsthand, being a mayor is not an easy job. You've got a lot of great constituents that you want to serve and serve with distinction. But every time you make a decision as a mayor, as an executive, there's someone who's happy, but there's also someone who might not be happy. So I urge you, when your mayor makes those tough and difficult decisions, be easy on them. We appreciate that. First of all, I just wanted to thank each and every one of you for coming this evening. It has been so far a real pleasure and an honor to serve as your new representative in Washington. The schedule so far has been, you're in Washington for 4 or 5 days, you come back for a weekend, you go back for 4 or 5 days, and then you come home for the weekend. And we have every month what we refer to as district work periods. This is my first district work period, and I wanted to do my first town hall here in Laconia. I really believe in your city, number one. Number two, I think it's an important part of our district. And I think it's a real reflection of America. So I wanted to be here to listen to you, to give you an update as to what's going on in Washington, and give you the opportunity to convey to me the things that you'd like to see in the 112th Congress, particularly in the coming months. So first, let me just give you sort of a brief overview of how things are going. You know, my wife and I went down with our kids, Colby and Jack, who are 7 and 6, for the swearing in. It was kind of interesting because my kids were allowed on the floor of the House. You kind of have to get to know the rules down there, and anyone under the age of 12 is allowed on to the floor when the House is in session. Adults, however, are not, which I didn't quite understand. It's easier to manage adults than kids, so you've got a bunch of kids running around the floor of the House because everybody brings their kids and their grandkids, and there's supposed to be a limit of 5 per member, which I adhere to, but I think I was one of the few. And kids are running around, and they're enjoying it, and after about 10 minutes, because that's the time span that a 7 and a 6-year-old really can meet before they get frustrated, they look at me and they say, "Daddy, what's taking so long?" So after about an hour of waiting, and my kids laying literally on the floor of the House, we had someone from the office go bring them back to the office, and my 6-year-old son, Jack, thought it would be funny, and this is while I'm getting sworn in. My folks are in the gallery, very proudly watching their son get sworn into Congress, and so I come back to the office, and my wife says that my son Jack, who's 6, decided to take one of the empty boxes in the office, because we had just moved in, proceed to bring it into the hallway of the House office building, get underneath the box, and decide when people walk by to shake and rattle the box. So this is my first day as a member of Congress. And I'm looking around the room, and I've got these people that I've hired, and my wife and family and friends, and so who thought this was a good idea? And of course, then Jack pipes in and he said, "And the police came to take away the box." And he is wearing this as a badge of honor, because people were complaining and obviously a little concerned about walking by and seeing a box move. And I tell you, he tells the story quite a bit, and he's really proud of it. And you know, the other day he asked me, "Daddy, when are we going to go down to Washington again? And do you have a box?" And I had to tell him, "Look, we can't do this. We've got to act in a little bit of a different way when you're in the halls of Congress." And it was really an exciting moment for me, and I really appreciate the honor and the distinction of serving and serving you, and I hope I do it with dignity and respect, and I hope that I'm able, to the best of my ability, reflect the things that you want me to do in Washington. I know that we're not always going to agree on every single issue, but I hope that you feel that you're always going to have access and availability to the person that's voting on your behalf. It's very, very important. And I think it's very important in this Congress. There's so many important issues that we are going to be debating as a nation. And while Congress won't get everything right all of the time, the most important thing to me is that I can come back to New Hampshire every week, get a feel for how people in New Hampshire want me to be voting. And I know that you've sent me to Washington for my judgment and my reflection of you, and I will use my judgment to the best of my ability, make sure that I am researching every particular issue that I'm overseeing as a committee member as well as voting on. But it's still important for me to come back, convey to you the things that I'm dealing with and how you want your member of Congress to vote. And with that, I do actually want to pass this around. This is the voting card that I use. And I feel that this is your voice in Washington. And I want to pass it around. I want everyone to take a look at it. And I want you to feel that you have the opportunity to have a voice on any single issue. What I do when I walk onto the floor of the House, I insert this into a little box, and you've got yes, no, or present. And this is what I do. This is what I use when I am voting on particular pieces of legislation. I didn't realize that there wasn't assigned seating on the floor of the House. I didn't realize that you actually had a voting card. And I think it's an important thing for people to know the process and the procedure. So I do want that, and I also want you to give it back to me at the end, because I think I have to pay money if I have to replace it. So, but I'll let you at least take a look at it. The first month has been, I have to say, not what we expected. We had an extremely unfortunate incident in Arizona with one of my new colleagues being shot. And that put a very, very different perspective, I think, on this Congress already. It, I think, in some ways, has a positive opportunity to define the code of conduct for every American, and to realize that the freedoms that we have are very precious. And while I briefly met Congresswoman Giffords, she read the First Amendment on the floor of the House. I read the Second Amendment on the floor of the House. That was the interaction I had with her. But her office is a couple floors below mine. I happened to be in Washington when I heard about the news. And the first thing I thought of is, I texted or emailed my wife just to let her know what happened, and I happened to be in Washington to let her know I was fine. But it gave me some pause to think about how important things are to us, family and friends, and the responsibility that I have. And I can tell you, as a member of the People's House, your house, I and many other members of Congress feel that it is vitally important to always stay in touch with our constituents. And despite this horrific incident, I certainly am not going to let it get in the way of making sure you always have access to your representative. We started, in terms of voting, with the rules package. And this is something that is really largely covered by media in Washington. The rules package, I think there are two very important components of the rules package. Number one, anyone, Republican, Democrat, freshman, or senior member of the Congress, can file amendments. That wasn't always the case. Here in the New Hampshire legislature, if you want a piece of legislation filed, you file it, it gets a hearing, you get to testify, and it gets a vote on the floor of the House, typically within a 3 to 4 month period before what everyone refers to as crossover day, where the House bills go to the Senate and the Senate bills go to the House. In Washington, it works a little differently. Seniority matters, but the value of, I think, the change in the country was a large freshman class that has tried to define itself through transparency, through open process for every member of Congress, and to allow someone like me to say on a bill, I think it can be and should be improved in a certain way. And those things actually can be a positive, productive part of the process. And it's not just meant for one party, it's meant for every member of Congress. And the other thing that I think is important is a rule that allows the Budget Committee to set spending limits. Previously, the budget process would work in such a fashion where the president would produce his budget, the House would then produce their budget, the appropriations committees would really put a lot of spending on top of those budgets, and you would get what we would hear as Christmas tree bills, and we would hear these arguments about whether we should be supporting these pieces of legislation or not, and those who were concerned about spending would say we've got to start over. Well, a lot of that is going to be eliminated by the simple fact that the Budget Committee is now going to play a much greater role in the actual process, procedure, and structure of the budget. I think that's a good thing for taxpayers, and I think it's a good thing for the time that we're in, given the debt and the deficit and the jobs and the economic issues that we're having. The couple of other bills that we voted on fairly quickly, and one of the first ones actually the first one after the rules package, was Congress cut their own budgets by 5%. So my budget, the budget for every member of Congress, as well as the House budget itself, cut by 5%. And I had talked about this last year, that I thought it was important in order to gain or regain the confidence of the country, that Congress had to take some steps to instill that confidence from people in our country and in the institution itself. After all, we talked a lot about the challenges that we have, the fiscal challenges, the tough decisions we're going to have to make. So at least saying to the country that we're going to cut ourselves first, I think sends a good, strong message that we are willing to be frugal and that we are willing to try to operate more effectively and efficiently. Because your taxpayer dollars operate our offices as well. So I appreciated being able to have that vote, and I can tell you the freshman class, being so large, advocated for that and wanted that. So this class, one of the largest in history, is already making, I think, strong and important strides. The next, one of the early votes was on the health care bill, the repeal, which passed the House. It did not pass the Senate. I think it was last evening by a few votes. So what will happen now on that is, after listening to the President's State of the Union, where he had talked about a few things, he talked about repealing the 1099 provision. He had talked about medical malpractice reform. And he talked about some other potential ways where the administration and the Congress could work in a collaborative fashion. So the House, now that we've heard the State of the Union, the Senate did not pass the repeal, the 7 committees of jurisdiction in the House will go to work and look at alternative proposals. That has become increasingly more important because of the judge's decision in Florida that issued a declaratory judgment stating this was not constitutional. Now, just because he did that doesn't mean that the issue is done. I suspect that the administration will appeal this to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's going to take a little time. But you're already seeing the effects of that Florida decision. Here in New Hampshire, I believe it was reported today, that our own insurance commissioner has pulled back the contracts to start implementing the health care bill. So I think it's important for the House to be even more responsive in some of the manner or some of the ways that we can ensure access and reduce employer and consumer cost. And I heard quite a bit over the last year that cost was a very, very important factor to people in New Hampshire. So I think there's probably 2 or 3 areas immediately that those 7 committees of jurisdiction will address. And they're probably a little bit easier than some of the other issues. So you'll see them come to the floor of the House probably maybe as early as March, and then in April and May, depending on how the process is working in those committees. But I think you'll see a bill that allows purchasing of insurance over state lines. There seems to be some bipartisan support for that. Secondly, I think you'll see the 1099 repeal provision fairly quickly. Small business owners in New Hampshire were particularly interested in that, as I spoke with business owners. And if you don't know that provision, it would cost if you spend $600 with a vendor, you have to file a 1099 for each vendor that you're spending more than $600 with in a given year. And to small business owners in particular, that's a costly item. You'd likely have to hire somebody just to fulfill that requirement. So there is bipartisan support for that repeal, including from the President. And then I think the third is, because the President mentioned it, medical malpractice reform. And here in New Hampshire, we're seeing the effects of defensive medicine and the cost of it. Today, I visited Lakes Region General Hospital. And I did that because, first of all, this is a very unique area. The population between here and Franklin requires strong medical care. You want vibrant hospitals. And I'd like to play a role in ensuring that they are providing the access, particularly here in Laconia, that you deserve. So I took a tour. I saw the new building that is slated to go online in November. And they took me through some of the things that they're doing in a cooperative way with other hospitals that I think are very, very beneficial to the people here in Laconia. And the first thing I said is, look, as a member of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, I can ask you to come and testify on healthcare-related issues, because if we can bring New Hampshire solutions and cooperative plans that are working here in New Hampshire down to Washington so other members of Congress can see them in action, I'd love to be able to utilize some of those good ideas and implement them, particularly if they're strategic, if they're cost-saving measures, and if they're allowing you greater access and better delivery of care. So I personally was very impressed with my meeting, with my meeting and with the hospital, and seeing some of the things that they're doing. And I feel like there's some opportunity here to bring some of that ingenuity to Washington and let people hear what they're doing. So if we start with those three things, there'll be other issues that the other committees will consider, but I see that those three as potentially the first three. The other important thing, given the fact that we have, starting next week, the budget process will begin, crafting the budget process will begin in the House. We'll start with some hearings, wait for the President to propose his budget, and then we'll start crafting the budget. But we've got a couple of things to do in the meantime. Because we don't have a budget for this current fiscal year that we're in, we've got to pass the CR, what's called the continuing resolution. We're looking to pass that at lower spending levels than the last continuing resolution. Then you're going to have the process of next year's budget. We've already voted to bring spending levels down to 2008. And that's primarily because we've been running $1.4, $1.5 trillion annual deficits. And that's accumulated to a $14 trillion debt. I have to say, I have not met every single member of Congress that I talk to is concerned about spending, debt, jobs, and economy. We may have some differences of opinion as to how to improve those circumstances, but it is on the minds of just about every member of Congress. And my hope is to offer to anyone who wants to work, with me on solutions. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in solutions. I'm interested in making sure that this economy becomes stronger, becomes more vibrant. And I'm interested in putting our country on a more fiscally responsible path. When you're a mayor, you have to deal with these things. You've got to have a balanced budget. When you're a homeowner, you've got to have a balanced budget. I know we all have a certain amount of debt that is acceptable levels. But I believe that we've got to start running this federal government truly like we're spending your money, and that we are responsible and we are being good stewards of your money. So I would like to be very active when I'm back in New Hampshire every week and hearing from you. As these things continue and you watch the C-SPAN or the media accounts of things, you have questions, I want you to be able to either email me or pick up the phone and call. And we'll get you answers and responses to questions that you have. But that's important, because I can only represent you as best as possible by listening and hearing from you. So I hope that you take the opportunity of providing me your ideas and your opinions. And don't worry if we don't agree. I mean, the one thing I learned as a mayor is when you listen to people of all sides, you find out good ideas that maybe you didn't think of, and you implement them. That's a good thing. And it gives you the opportunity, I think, to be actively engaged in this Congress. And that's part of my goal, because this is your office, it's your Congress, it's your House. I happen to be the conduit of your vote. So I'm here in New Hampshire till Tuesday. I fly back down, and we sort of resume that weekly schedules in Washington, come back on the weekends, and then late February I'm back again for another week or so district work period. And that's the way it's roughly going to play out for the course of the year. And it's been nothing short of fascinating to get to know new members of Congress, to hear the ideas and solutions that people have, and really the willingness, I think, for members on both sides of the aisle to try to find common ground. And that has been important to me, because the issues that we're facing, I really believe are American issues and are about the future of our country. As a father of a 7- and a 6-year-old, I want to make sure that I hand over a better opportunity for them, just like my folks did for me. And I feel that we have a very unique opportunity in this country right now to provide that kind of leadership, and I hope that we do.